In the Gospel of Luke, there is a story about a man who's walking down a road. And as this man is walking down the road, some people come along. They beat him to within an inch of his life. They leave him for dead after they have taken his clothes and his money. And two people come and see this man lying on the side of the road. And both of them have excuses for why they don't want to take care of this man. And then comes a Samaritan. Now, if you're a first century listener of this story, a Samaritan is this red flag. Like, what do you mean it's a Samaritan? What will the Samaritan do to this person? The Samaritan sees this man, has compassion, and mercy, and love. He bends down, covers him up, patches him up, puts him on his horse, takes him to an inn, and at the inn pays for the innkeeper to take care of him until he's fully recovered. Such a remarkable, beautiful story. And the story comes out of a question that is asked of Jesus. And Jesus is in conversation with a teacher. And Jesus asks this man to sum up the law. And the man says, well, the law says to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, exactly. Do this and live. Go and love God and love your neighbor. And the man, almost as if he realizes he's lost the debate, or he's lost the argument, or he's been challenged to an uncomfortable place, says, but who is my neighbor? The funny thing about this question is that he knows exactly who his neighbor is. And we know exactly who our neighbors are. And we are being invited all the time to engage with them, to get to know them, to have a transformative experience of really getting to know somebody. But getting to know somebody who is different from yourself, especially when the differences seem to be so vast, can be very uncomfortable. So let's go into this lightly to start. I'm going to show you a movie from YouTube. It's a little girl. I'm guessing she's maybe, a year old. And her father has decided to play, maybe it's a cruel prank on her. He's holding her and he's loving her, and then he goes in, and he puts her down, he goes into the washroom, and he takes off his beard. And for this 1-year-old, it's like a stranger walks out of the bathroom. So take a look. Hopefully it'll play. It's not going to play. I'll show you it later. It's really, really cute. She comes out and she sees her dad, and she touches his face, and then she doesn't really know, and then she just starts weeping, and her mother's like, oh my goodness, child, it's just your father, and she can't see it, and she's so uncomfortable, and the father feels terrible because he's just played this rather cruel prank on his daughter, and so it unfolds. I think sometimes that's a little bit like what we feel when we encounter a stranger, but I don't know you, and I don't understand you, and I don't understand your worldview, and I don't understand why you do that, and I don't know where you're coming from. And why do you eat that food? Because that looks really gross to me. And so often we put up walls, and we put up barriers. But here's the thing. I think that many of the scriptures and many of the stories, both in Old and New Testament, call us to encounter our neighbor, to encounter the person that is different from us, that we might be changed. And not only that we might be changed, that these stories promote justice, they encourage compassion. And when we see these stories and the effects of encountering our neighbor, we can fully see the divine. When we encounter people who are not like us, we have an opportunity to more fully encounter the divine. What I want to do today is unpack this idea. I want to lay a foundation for the who is my neighbor question, and that will become important later on. So let's start with promotes justice. Suppose I were to give you a call one day. I were to pick up the phone and say, I would like to come over for coffee. And by the way, I'm bringing a guest with me. And you say, okay. And then I tell you some things about my guest. Now, I'm going to walk around this very carefully, because if I don't, I'll get in trouble. So suppose I tell you my guest is an immigrant Iranian Muslim. Now, these labels that we put on this person may, and that's a very important word, may be helpful for some things. For example, we know that people from different cultures have different traditions when they go to visit each other. And so if this person comes over to your house and they do something that seems a little weird, you might have a little bit more understanding of it because you know that they're from a different tradition. If you know that they're from Iran, it may be helpful for you to do some research and to learn a little bit more about Iran and their traditions and their cultures. And if you know that they're Muslim, you might want to know if it's Ramadan, because if it's Ramadan, they're fasting from sunup to sundown. Some don't even drink water during that time. And so you might want to rethink what you're going to do for hospitality. And so these labels can be helpful. They do inform stories, but they are also labels. And labels can be very, very, very dangerous. Because, well, you can have positive reactions to these labels, you can also have very negative reactions to these labels. Now, obviously, I chose these intentionally because these are some of the labels that I think have a lot of weight for a lot of people. In many places, it's seen to be a negative that you're an immigrant, although if you're sitting here and you're white, you are an immigrant to this place. Canada has been in conflict with Iran for quite a number of years, and so we have all sorts of negative connotations when we think about the country. And the media has told us again and again all sorts of really terrible negative stereotypes about people who belong to the Muslim faith tradition, and many of those have no weight. It's like if the people from Westboro Baptist Church claimed Christian for all of us. So these labels can be helpful, but if we're not careful, and I think often we're not, these labels are very dangerous. In Galatians, there's this great passage. So in Christ Jesus, you are all children of God through faith. For all of you who were baptized into Christ have clothed yourself with Christ. Now there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Now I would argue you could easily rewrite this passage. There is neither Iranian nor Canadian, male or female, Muslim or Christian, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Now, does that mean that you cease being a male or you cease being a female under this idea? Well, no. But we're allowing ourselves, we're giving permission for those labels to not hold any power over us. You may be free. You may be a slave. You may be a Jew. You may be a Gentile. You may be a Canadian. You may be an Iranian. You may be male. You may be female. You may be gay or straight or transgender or questioning bisexual. Those are not labels that we are going to allow ourselves to hold power over one another. And that list of labels goes on and on and on. This is really famously played out, I think, in an incredibly beautiful piece of literature. If I have it. I do. Great. In All Quiet on the Western Front. In All Quiet on the Western Front, there is a soldier from the German army in the First World War in a crater. And during one of the firefights, somebody from one of the Western armies dives into this crater for protection. And the German officer does exactly what he's trained to do. He takes out his knife and he tries to kill this man. And it kind of works. And the man is slowly dying. And as this man is breathing heavily and groaning in his midst, all of a sudden, things begin to change. And as this man is beginning to breathe his last breaths, he says this: "Comrade, I did not want to kill you. If you jumped in here again, I would not do it if you would be sensible too. But you are only an idea to me, an abstraction that lived in my mind and called forth an appropriate response. It was an abstraction that I stabbed. But now, for the first time, I see you are like a man like me. I thought of your hand grenades, of your bayonet, of your rifle. And now I see your wife and your face and our fellowship. Forgive me. We always see it too late. Why do they never tell us that you are just poor guys like us? That your mothers are just as anxious as ours? That we have the same fear of death and dying and the same agony? Forgive me. How could you be my enemy? If we threw away these rifles and this uniform, you and I, we could be brothers. Take 20 years of my life. Please stand up. Take more, for I do not know what I can attempt to do with this now." And the man breathes his last breath. So the removal of labels, or the removal of these labels to have power over us, promotes justice. And they encourage compassion. The stories encourage us to be compassionate towards one another. When I was 5 years old, my family moved. We moved within the same city, but to a completely different neighborhood. And when you're 5 years old, you might as well be moving into a completely different world. And on one particular day, my father took my sister and I for a walk. My mother was at home with our brand new baby brother, and my dad took us out of the house. And I was riding a bike, and my sister was in a stroller, and we walked almost a kilometer down to the little mall that was down the street. And on the way back, my father had an idea. My father's always thinking of these ideas. And on this day, he looked up, and there was a little side street that was a crescent. And he had beside him this little 5-year-old boy who was full of energy. And so he had an idea. He said, "John, here's what I want you to do. This is a crescent. It's just going to go down that way, turn around, and it's going to come back, and it's going to meet me just over there." And he points down the road 50 meters. And he says, "You'll just bike around that, and I'll just meet you over there." And so I'll go an extra 250 meters than he does, and it'll all be well. Except this neighborhood is new to my father, and this was no ordinary crescent. So, my little heart racing, I run or bike down this crescent, and it turns like you would expect the crescent to, and it turns back the other way, and then it diverges into a path, and little 5-year-old John is in a neighborhood on a baseball field in a place that he has no idea where he is. And I can only imagine what my father was thinking, waiting for me to come out on the other side, and his child doesn't show up. For him, stranger in a strange land, missing a child. For me, a young kid on a bike in the middle of the baseball field. Many of you have been strangers in a strange land too. Maybe it's the first time you moved away from home. You moved to university, to a different town, to a different place, to a different city, and it felt unknown. Maybe it was after a divorce. 20 years, everything was fine, and then it falls apart, and all of a sudden you find yourself a stranger in a strange, unknown land. And about 80% of you have moved here in the last 5 or 10 years. You know what it's like to have to start all over again, to be a stranger in a new land. And this, of course, is language that is used in the Exodus story. God reminds the people to love the foreigner residing among you, because you are to love them, because you too found yourself strangers in Egypt. So these stories promote justice, they encourage compassion, and they give us a more full or more complete encounter of the divine. So pork chops. I grew up in Southern Ontario, and meat and potatoes is the food of choice. Like, it's pork chops and potatoes, steak and potatoes, bacon and potatoes, like whatever. It's like something and potatoes. It's a very, very kind of the same diet, and because meat's readily available and everyone eats it. And granted, it's tasty, but it's only such a small subset of what food is and can be. Like, pork chops and potatoes and green beans is so different from pad thai. But pad thai is delicious, right? Like rice noodles and tamarind paste and bean sprouts and prawns. Like, oh, that's good stuff. Or hummus and pitas. Like, if all you know is eating pork chops, you're totally missing out on this whole other piece of food culture. And then, what about buttered chicken? Like, oh, that stuff is so good. If you haven't had buttered chicken, go and have buttered chicken today. Really good stuff. So, if we only know pork chops and green beans and potatoes, and we don't know pad thai and butter chicken and hummus and pita and we never try something new, we're kind of missing out on a fuller picture. Or how about art? I love abstract art. Jackson Pollock's. Right? I could look at abstract art all day long. I hear me too up here, right? But if all you do is look at abstract art, maybe you miss something really beautiful, like some of the Aboriginal artwork on this coast. It moves, it inspires. Or how about terracotta warriors? 7,000 of them, all uniquely carved, not one looking the same as the other. It's great if you stay only in abstract art. But what happens when you experience all of these other pieces? We can do the same with spiritual practice as well. Our Muslim brothers and sisters pray 5 times a day, intentionally, out loud, with a call that comes from a minaret. When you want to sleep in, terribly annoying. When you wake up to it and it moves you, very different. And they stop everything in the streets and pray. That's a really beautiful gesture and symbol. Our Catholic brothers and sisters recognize mystery so much better than our Protestant word-centered heads. The taste, the touch, the smells, all matter to them. That's part of their culture and their tradition. Or how about those who practice yoga, who recognize that the body is intimately connected with our spirit? If we only ever know church services that look like this, and we never reach outside and get to know other practices, it's okay. But we might actually find something that is more complete when we encounter the other. As it happens, I actually think art and food are also places that we find the divine. So the more we allow ourselves to get to know our neighbor, the more we answer this question, who is my neighbor? The more justice we'll have, the more compassion we'll cultivate, and the more we'll have a fuller picture, a more complete picture of the divine. Encountering our neighbor does not mean acceptance or agreement. It does not mean that simply by talking with somebody you have to agree or condone or accept everything they say. It's more about questioning and listening and exploring. So for the next 4 weeks after this, we are going to try to answer this question, who is my neighbor? To do this, we are inviting neighbors to our time and our place. We are going to get to know some of our neighbors. It all starts next week. Julianne Kasmer from Our Place, which is an outreach ministry in Victoria, is coming. And she's bringing with her somebody who is just working their way out of homelessness. He's got a story to tell. He is our neighbor. We're going to sit up there. If I have my way, we'll put a couch and a chair. It'll be like a living room. And they'll tell us our story, and we will listen. And my hope is that we will be transformed by that experience. And if all the dates settle in just right, we'll also have somebody from Hope Farm, somebody from the Muslim faith community, all to tell us their story, that we might be changed, that we might encounter our neighbor, that we might find justice and compassion and a fuller, more complete image of the divine. Amen.